You're listening to the Karmic Mirror podcast, where we explore the wisdom tucked within the layers of the self-help world.
Together, we bridge the gap between esoteric teachings and practical tools for everyday life, with self-love and personal growth at the heart of each conversation.
Whether you're a seasoned seeker or just beginning your path, join us and uncover the magic within and around you.
Hello, Karmic Mirror community. Hi, Michelle. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm good.
Welcome back to another episode where today we are talking all about boundaries. Boundaries from our perspective of what are they? How do they show up in our lives? How do they influence our lives? What impact have they had on our lives? And from there, I would imagine that we will include a lot of other topics as boundaries expand out into other thoughts and ideas. And so, as we start out, just kind of thinking about boundaries and what are boundaries, I think a lot of what I see out there, and whether personal experiences or just the verbiage of boundary, is this really, I am setting a boundary. This is my boundary, and a really just like firm stance in the ground around boundaries. And what I know to be true about boundaries is that boundaries are not meant to separate us and create that block of if this and or that. That feels more ultimatum for me, is like I'm setting a boundary of keeping that distance. Boundaries are really meant to build safe and connected relationships. What are your initial thoughts on boundaries, Michelle?
I think that boundaries are agreements, and they can be with ourselves. Oftentimes, I think setting boundaries with yourself are a great starting point. They can be with other people, and I think they allow us to stay connected to our values and to keep ourselves real well resourced energetically, mentally, emotionally, physically, all of the above. I think they are, the word container comes up as well. Containers to, yeah, like I said, preserve what matters to us, be it your energy, your time, your relationships. But like you said, they exist, or they need to exist or be established, however that happens, to be able to really thrive, to be able to be connected with others, to be able to live honestly with yourself and with other people in your life. And so that's what really comes up first when I think about boundaries. And I do think, to your point, oftentimes we consider them to be these kind of like hard mark or lines in the sand that we draw. And maybe on an extreme, that's certainly it. But I think that they can be more subtle. They can be energetic. They can be verbal, relational. They can be around behaviors or your patterns, like really, really thinking about your practical day-to-day life.
And what's interesting is that opening up and thinking about boundaries, yes, I was very much thinking about it. And my brain with boundaries goes to that relationship, right? Two
Mm-hmm.
people need to be involved to create a boundary. What I'm glad that you called out and has my wheels turning is setting boundaries with yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and sometimes those relational boundaries are boundaries with ourselves. So, for
Mhm.
example, this comes up in coaching. Of course, it comes up in coaching because, if your first impression of setting a boundary, or first awareness that a boundary needs to be set, that can instill a lot of discomfort, because immediately you start to think, oh, well, now I have to have a conversation. What is that going to look like? What is the other person how are they going to take it? And what does that mean for us, right? To your point, back to the connection, not meant to separate us, but sometimes the boundary really is, I can love you from a distance,
Yeah.
but it comes up in coaching oftentimes because sometimes you're rehearsing what the conversation might look like. And sometimes you're just uncovering that really you just need to set a boundary with yourself. What am I willing to accept from this person? And where am I drawing my personal line? And maybe it doesn't even need to be this direct, like, you did this, or what, maybe that's not the right way. But, it doesn't need to be this, when you do XYZ, it makes me feel XYZ way. And that's why I need to set this. But maybe you don't need to say any of that. It's
Mhm.
just simply a boundary of, when this person, if this person responds in a certain way, I am not going to engage. My boundary is that I'm not going to engage. I'm not going to put my energy there, and I'm going to set that standard for myself. And so it can look, I think, a ton of different ways. But on that note of the relational boundaries, the very verbal or nonverbal, but relational boundaries, I saw this quote come up from this person who is the co-founder of the Embodiment Institute. I'm not familiar with this institute, but their name is Prentice Temple, I'm sorry. And they said, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And I really loved that in return, in reference to those relational boundaries, because I think that's probably something that almost everyone can relate to. I can definitely think of at least one person in my life who maybe I didn't necessarily tell that person, hey, I'm not going to engage or I'm not going to do this. I just did it. And I've needed to keep this particular person at a distance because every single time we're in the same space, I was feeling just more emotions and more than I could
Yeah.
really responsibly and lovingly handle. And I knew that I was going to react in a certain way. And so for myself, I'm like, I gotta just keep my distance. I gotta love you from afar so that I can love myself as well. And so that I can work on the ways in which I respond or react. And so just one of many examples that comes up when we talk about boundaries.
Yeah, Mark Groves has an online course that is still active. And I say, Mark Groves taught me boundaries. And when I met him at VCon, I think that was
Mhm.
my first words to him. I was geeking out a little bit, but the understanding of what a boundary is and is not really did change my world because, to your point, what you were just talking about, there didn't need to necessarily be an action item at that
Mhm.
moment of, okay, now I know how I can formulate boundaries. And in that course, it does talk about how you communicate boundaries and just getting curious. Really informed and positively impacted my life in many ways. And the way that it was outlined in that course, which really resonated with me, was boundaries, safe boundaries, appropriate boundaries are when you feel safe and connected because we can be in relationships with people and feel very connected and not feel safe. And
Mhm.
that's not a mutually beneficial relationship. And you can feel safe and not connected. And I've seen this pop up. And when he gave me that verbiage, really that clear sense of what those boundaries were, I perked up and just really started thinking about not only situations, but relationships and getting curious about that. And really noticing that I have chameleoned myself into a lot of relationships where, man, I felt connected, but I didn't feel safe really being my authentic and vulnerable self. And in a lot of ways, safe meant what I alluded to initially was just cutting off all ties. And we may need to do that. Distance may be the most loving thing, or space. Taking a break from people might be the appropriate next step. But those were the principles and boundaries that really started to aha for me. And when thinking about communicating it, it sounded more like, hey, this relationship is super important to me. And I'm not feeling safe in it, or I'm not feeling connected in it. And here's what that might look like for me, and having a conversation as opposed to when you said really drawing that line in the sand. Yeah, I think there's a fine line with boundaries between appropriate boundaries if there are times where you need to draw a line in the sand, and that is distance or disconnection from somebody, if that is what is healthier for you. And there's also that drawing a line which just feels enforcing and you're in trouble, or maybe more of an ultimatum like, this is my boundary and you don't cross it, or else, which is not where that sweet spot of really thinking about boundaries lands.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think it's really hard to do that with, let's say, another person if you're not aware of the boundaries maybe more subtle that you need to uphold for yourself, right? It's like, yes, you may tell someone, this is for me, for my whatever your reasoning is, and they're going to respond in whatever way they want to. And I think the follow-up for me always feels like, well, how am I going to take this and how am I going to still hold myself accountable here? If they respond in whatever way they're going to, am I going to then just throw it all out the door and forget that they also may have some energetic or real boundaries themselves and just totally, or am I going to set some clear kind of like expectations for myself? If this person responds in a way that further inflames, like, am I going to give into that? Or am I just going to allow myself to be okay with however they take it? Because so that's really interesting. I also think when we talk about those types of relational boundaries, there is the very like, I don't want to say they're surface level, but initially it's like, what is the verbal of it, right? Like the first things we talk about are learning to say no. Or maybe
Hmm.
not the first things, but that's one of the first things that comes up. And I
No
think,
is a complete sentence.
yeah, saying no, saying not right now, asking for what you need, those kind of all really tie into it. And it's so interesting in coaching because, like I've mentioned before, sometimes you literally are rehearsing how to have a conversation. I mean, that has happened with me so many times in coaching conversations where the person needs to express what's coming up and stop pushing it down and letting the
Yeah.
other person, right? Because again, like back to the self boundaries, like, just because someone does something that makes you feel unsafe or in whatever it is, we both are in this interaction. You are both contributing to whatever the outcome or the experience is. So if you're not self-aware to say, like, maybe for X amount of time, I just kept my mouth quiet and I let this person be who they are and it didn't sit well with me, but I didn't do anything about it. We have to take, I think, responsibility for the way that we show up as well, and then
Yeah.
hold ourselves to that. Okay, I have let this go on because whatever reasons, right? There's no right or wrong. I just did. And maybe it's my own, whatever.
Mhm.
But
I
I
think it's like
think,
the simplicity is coming up, but I think it's coming up because, and maybe I'm just projecting this and my experience of boundaries, but boundaries come up in a very everyday, doesn't have to be like this harsh, big
mhm,
thing. We set boundaries every day. And maybe that's not the right word, but as you were talking, the nuances of boundaries come in all different sizes
yeah.
and forms.
Okay, so on that note, personally, I am someone who is very adamant about not being available or accessible 24/7. It is just a personal boundary for me that I am that do not disturb person.
Mm.
Sorry, not sorry, but for the most
But
part,
definitely not sorry because you're protecting your boundaries. Yeah.
that's just it. For me, I don't want to be at the mercy of whatever pops up on my phone. And quite honestly, lately it's come up a lot just simply because I do a lot of work in the community and I planning local events and being on committees and in different organizations and I really enjoy those things. Also, this is what you do. These are things that you do with your free time, right? It's most of it is volunteer work and or you pay to be in the organizations. So there is this element of, and I'll just kind of try to distill this down, but so often when you volunteer for things, I think a common theme you see, no matter where you live, if you do any sort of volunteer type of work or local planning with your free time and energy, you end up finding that there's a few people who do a lot of the work and then the expectations for you to continue to do it and do more happen, and that's fine. But lately, I've had to be really, really do the draw the hard line in the sand. And it's looked like for me, listen, I am not going to respond to the like being inundated with text messages about something when someone else's time, someone else's urgency is like it's a 911, but in the really, it's not. It's not. And I can't live that way. I have other things, we all have things going on in our lives, but for me, I'm just not accessible all the time. You can't, if it's really, really important, I will look, I check my phone. I'm not a, I'm a product of this world we live in. I have my phone here. It's right next to me, a lot of the time, but I'm not always accessible. And that's a personal boundary. And when I feel that someone is taking advantage of that or stepping over that as consistently after I've said the thing and then said it
Mhm.
again, then yeah, I do set a really hard boundary. And that's when, everyone's different in their approach. For me personally, I have no problem with it. I have no problem, but I prefer that we just respect each other the first time around.
Yeah.
But I also don't have a problem being standing on business.
No, you do not. I don't F's with you. It takes Michelle a
It
while
takes
to
me a
get
long time.
there. It takes her a very, very long time to get there, but that's what comes out for me, Michelle, is when you get there, that's like the I don't F's with you anymore,
That's
right? And
exactly it. Because
yeah,
and those are just one small example of, that's important to me. I don't want to be, at the mercy of the notifications and the messages and the emails for, with this insane sense of urgency that everything is a 911 because it's not. And I
yeah,
don't live my life that way.
your urgency is not an emergency for me
It's
always.
not, and it's not an emergency for anyone else either. But and that's a whole other topic, right?
Yeah.
Because I could go down nervous system regulation, and I
Yeah.
could
Root
go
causes,
down,
programming.
all
Yeah.
the things, and I won't because it's so specific. But that's one that's really important to me is like, I'm not going to do the check my phone every time it dings because that's a personal boundary.
Yeah.
And, that's one that comes up and it's just like I said, it's been relevant recently because I've had to, put my foot down.
Yeah.
But a lot of times that just doesn't come very easily for a lot of people, which is why it comes up in the space of coaching, in the space of therapy, because, not everybody can. I mean, it's funny, like I would say it feels a lot like the majority of people, and I'm probably wrong, but it feels this way needs support in how to set boundaries and how to distinguish or discern whether it's a boundary that needs to be spoken and said, and then the work that goes into preparing yourself for that conversation, or whether it's just simply something that you need to hold yourself accountable to. I think I've almost been on like the opposite end because, again, go figure, my fight or flight response is totally fight.
Yeah.
And so it's been like how to rein it in and let people also respect other people's just way of doing life and communicating and acting and just taking the time to observe that and then act accordingly based on what it is, right? Like leveling it down sometimes,
Yeah.
but still.
Well, in my experience, I literally did not realize that I had permission to set boundaries. I didn't understand
Mm.
that boundaries were an issue is what was going on. And there were a couple of real aha moments for me. And I find myself when talking about boundaries, there's two things that I reference a lot in conversations when boundaries come up, and two big shifts. One, reading Glennon Doyle's book Untamed.
Mhm.
The one thing that made a huge difference is be willing to disappoint others before disappointing yourself.
I knew that was going to be the one you said because that's the only quote I remember from the book as well. Like, and then remembered one thing, that exact sentiment. And I've told my sister that, and like,
Yeah,
it's
and
so good.
it's so good. I think it comes so naturally to some people,
Yeah.
and that's great. And for me, there was this moment of it clicked because a friend was unintentionally, and that's our job as well to
Mhm.
communicate our boundaries to people. But there was a friend who was starting to integrate somebody that I didn't feel quite comfortable with into my really trust circle is the high level. Now, this person had no idea that I was feeling that way, but it was really, I was feeling really stressed about it and right, get into nervous system. Probably that was a little bit more like fight, flight, or freeze than it needed to be at the time. But nonetheless, it was a really cool example of when I read that part, I just said, you are stressing yourself. You're literally losing sleep. You're so anxious that this person you don't feel safe around because basically a friend was trying to introduce somebody who I didn't have a really great interaction with people in my trusted circle. And then I'm telling myself all of these stories and all the things. And really, when I started thinking about, I just want to say something about how I feel about that, then the ego creeps in and it starts to be like, oh my gosh, with everything that person has going on, I marginalize it or I belittle it, right? You can't say that. You can't speak your needs because that's not a big deal compared to what this person's, got going on. And when I read that line, I just had this epiphany. Why am I sitting around feeling so uncomfortable about this? And it was because I'm trying to stay connected with this person
Mm-hmm.
and was afraid that if I said something, it would then make them so uncomfortable that, go down the line of all of the things
Mm-hmm.
your ego can tell you. And that was the one moment I just decided to text and just say, hey, listen, I'm a little uncomfortable with this connection. These people are like my family, and that person had some pretty funky energy and behaviors towards me, and it doesn't feel safe for me to start making this a big group, is the short story. And that person responded so beautifully, right? Oh, I didn't even realize, and you're so right. And that was my first experience. And since then, not only did that experience make me feel super safe that I'm allowed to ask for the things I need, but I often start to think about that when I'm over giving, over showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And back to your point, Michelle, it's even if you look at it from I'm overextending my time, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't set that boundary. All you're doing is making your day more stressed to make other people's days less stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And where have we been programmed? And that seems silly. But you said that's the one that you remember as well from that book.
Yeah, I just really loved it. And I thought, in the context of Untamed, she was talking to her daughter. And I think societally that young girls and women are conditioned to, not everyone, but are generally conditioned to just allow people to, to not, like you said, not know that they have permission to set boundaries, that they didn't actually need the permission, and that your feelings, your energy, your space, your physical space, all of it matters. And it's okay to disappoint other people if it means that you are going to preserve your own emotional health, mental health, sense of safety. And not only is it okay, but it's absolutely necessary. And to what you said earlier, too, it's like about the boundaries and being connected and caring about the relationship. So saying the thing, I mean, when we don't say the thing, when we don't, quote unquote, share whatever the boundary is, I won't say set a boundary because that feels really strong, but share where our personal boundaries lie with the person or the relationship that we truly do care about, then we're not connecting with them because we're keeping something really important from them. But not only that, we're putting up a wall between us now. And from there, it's like the total opposite of connection because then unconsciously, most times, we're resentful and we're avoiding. And so it just has the total opposite effect on the relationships that we genuinely care about and want to be closer. And, none of that comes, I don't think, from being in your comfort zone. Like there's a reason
Yeah.
why boundaries make us in speaking them out loud or even acknowledging them to ourselves, why it feels uncomfortable because like, and I go back to this feeling of when I'm in a sense of discomfort or when I'm nervous, oftentimes it's because I give a shit, because I care,
Mm.
not because I don't care. And towards why boundaries are so important of a topic to just explore is, without any sense of boundaries, one, it's really freaking draining. It's
Yeah.
draining and
Energy leakage.
it's energy leaks. We stay stuck in old cycles or patterns and we allow our fears and we allow our limitations to guide us versus letting our honesty and our truth guide us.
Mhm. Well, and in that example, very connected. Had I not said anything, we would have maintained being connected and not safe because
Mhm.
not feeling safe to speak your truth and your authenticity. to
Hmm.
your point.
And something else about feeling safe and secure, it's almost, I think, can feel like this elusive concept or abstract, or we just say, like, I'm not feeling safe, I'm not feeling secure. And sometimes people take offense, like, you don't feel safe around me, right? There's that. There's also the way that we can play it down as if, like, oh, these are just words we use, these are therapy words, or whatever it is, right? But something I was thinking about recently, and this is where, like, the mind body disconnect happens sometimes, because I do this thing every morning. I wake up and it's so simple. I literally every morning I put my hand on my chest and my other hand on my belly, and I tell myself, like, I am safe, I am secure, and I am so grateful for blah blah blah, whatever it is, right? Usually it always is my dogs because they're snuggled up on me. And my mind comes in when I've done this for some time now, and I didn't even really have a huge reason for it, because here's where the mind comes in is I've always been like, I don't feel unsafe. I don't feel insecure. I feel pretty freaking good most of the time. And and so I wrote about this recently in my Substack about having a strong inner dialogue. And I don't mean strong inner dialogue as in, like, I'm a cheerleader for myself all the time. My inner dialogue is not that. My inner dialogue is not a cheerleader. It is literally just a voice of reason for myself, and reason and feeling, because then it's like I have those questions like, well, I'm doing this, but, like, I don't feel unsafe in my body. And then I started to kind of let myself sit with that. And I was like, okay, I don't have to be conscious of all the ways I may or may not feel unsafe. Sometimes it's so subtle and it is in the subconscious, and I don't have to explain or reason away. Sometimes it is truly that I woke up and maybe I clenched my teeth a little bit and I could feel it in my jaw. And I don't have an explanation for why, because there's no external thing that's stressing me out, but it just was. And for whatever reason, unconsciously, I don't need to know, but I woke up and I wasn't 100% at ease, or I wasn't whatever it is, right? So for me, that simple act of, like, I am secure, I am safe, it doesn't have to feel like I'm under threat. I just
Yeah.
need to wake up, and the first words, because my words are spells that I'm casting,
Mhm.
are to soothe myself in the morning.
Yeah.
And I don't need to have a reason for it or even feel chaotic, but it is something it has totally, like, one of those things that you do that is so subtle, but over time you're like, oh, yeah, this is a reflex I reach for. And I don't know, I just was thinking about that lately, and maybe it's not so directly of a line to boundaries in itself, but actually I could tie a line to boundaries.
It's appropriately attached. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's subtle and it's necessary for me because it feels right. It feels right for that to be the first thing. And when I think about the boundary, it's that I don't wake up and reach for anything outside of myself. I don't reach for whatever's on my nightstand. I don't reach for my phone. I reach for myself and my own insourcing of safety and security as the very first thing when I open my eyes and when I'm in that still waking mindset.
What word comes up for me is resilience. How it connects to boundaries when I think about it is building your resilience towards feeling confident that you're allowed to have a boundary, that you're allowed those things. And when you're really hearing your inner voice of, like, what safety is for you, and leaning on your inner voice and your inner trust, is that is building that confidence and that path towards not disappointing yourself, because you really are in tuned and in touch with yourself. And this was that second thing that I think pairs nicely with what you're talking about now. This came to me via way of Iana Van Zant, whether she created it or not. It stuck with me when she said it. Was the only people that will have an issue or a problem with you setting a boundary is those who benefited from you having none.
Hmm.
And what has been very, I would say, eye-opening, interesting, and space to have more conversation around is seeing how people respond to things. And
Hmm.
I know you and I have talked a lot during some pretty big boundaries that I've had to set in regards to my mental health and my well-being the last couple of years. And
Hmm.
I remember one time I was having a conversation and you literally like, girl, you realize you're the only person that I know that sets a boundary and then calls to apologize for setting a boundary, which was
Hmm.
so eye-opening to me, but also lands back in that theme of I had to start getting curious about how people responded to me setting boundaries. And
Hmm.
I will always default to the me thing of like, what could I do differently? And so I've got that on my radar and fair. Could boundaries sometimes be communicated differently? Yes. And there also, I had to get real about, and it was very in my face of how people responded to the exact same way a boundary was communicated. And that was very eye-opening for me.
Wait, tell me more about that. So I understand more what you're saying.
Yeah, just that, let's say you have a group of friends and you need something from that group of friends, or you need to communicate a boundary. Seeing just the vast difference
Mm,
of who takes issue with that,
I
who's
see.
combative versus who might say, no problem, of course.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's a lot of different examples lying in there that has led to continuing my boundary work.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when you were talking about the nervous system, flashback to season one, we did a 4-part nervous system series on what is the nervous system and then how can we positively impact that. I think it was a phenomenal connect that you brought up because also, boundaries are not a response to somebody else's behavior, but it's you using your voice for your self-worth and your health and
Hmm.
things that are good for you. And how that ties together for me is if our nervous system is shot, a boundary may not be a boundary in that moment or communicated in a way that is beneficial for you because you might be in that fight, flight, or freeze and thinking that you need something right in that moment. So my brain was going all over the place
Yeah.
with what you said, but that's, I think, your daily practice in the morning is setting you up for success, not
Yeah.
only with your nervous system, but being able to set boundaries as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it is always interesting to see how we approach things so differently, like in the sun, in many different ways, but also because I think, one, I'm a sacral authority in human design. This is your gut instinct and feels very physical to me. And you do have that, but you are an emotional authority. And there's other elements here at play, right? Like I think of your Virgo rising. I think of the quad left of it all in human design. So having a really active mind versus where I have more of a passive mind. So of course, naturally, we're going to approach things differently. So when I say like, I don't need to understand I don't have to understand why. It's because I'm literally, this is so innate to not need to know the why, but just know that it feels right. And it's so, and that doesn't apply to everything, you know. I love to know things.
Yeah, it's
They
not
just
black
might
and
be
white.
random
It's
things.
it's
Yeah.
not clear cut, and
Yeah. But it is interesting to
we do
see.
naturally fall into our energies and our designs
That's
too.
exactly it. One, it's so interesting to see the ways that they can be approached just differently, right? Everyone is so different. But the point is like, yeah, their energy leaks. I think one of the very first things, concepts that I had learned maybe in my Kundalini journey was just this idea of, what is leaking or draining your energy and what is giving you more energy. And it opened up this whole portal into exploring energy from a mental, emotional, physical, spiritual standpoints and seeing the ways that we limit and we allow things to, choose certain draining or what or building. And I don't know where I was going with that, but I do think on the topic of boundaries is really, really important. I also wanted to say that because we just recorded the intro to our second in our new moon monthly tarot reading with Liz Pratt, obviously my mind is on the current season that we're in. We're in eclipse season. We're approaching the second of these two eclipses. And this new moon in Virgo, this solar eclipse that's happening for us, as we record, it's really in a few days. It's in near the South Node and it's in opposition to Saturn. And I guess what's coming up a lot is that Saturn is structure and discipline. And I think boundaries have a role in that conversation. As we've talked a lot about already, boundaries don't have to feel so straightforward. They don't have to be the hard line in the sand. They can be, and sometimes they need to be, but they don't have to look that way all the time. But when I think about discipline, when I think about structure, boundaries is exactly that. And I think of all of those things exist so that we can feel a sense of freedom. And we have discipline in our lives so that we can have flexibility and freedom in our lives. We have structures so that we can free flow. And if we just think about children, totally random, but if I think about children, right, and I don't have any kids, but I have dogs. But I think about the ways in which you set frameworks or structure for your children to then explore and have freedom and autonomy within those structures because it's safe. You say like, I don't know, I'm not a parent, so I can't give a specific example, but I do know that there are so many ways in which we need to set up structures to allow ourselves to freely and safely explore what that looks like to, have a sense of freedom or flow or whatever that looks like. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Makes
Yeah,
sense to me.
yeah. Maybe what's coming up when you're talking is the black and white is coming up for me again. Boundaries are not black and white. I mean, yes, putting hands on, and back to the kids thing, putting hands on people, right? That can be a very black and white boundary of you don't touch other people. You don't physically touch
Yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
people and hurt other people. And then there is this subjectiveness to it where it can get a little bit more nuanced. I think about, gosh, this is a while ago that during kind of my first awakening and I was really understanding the energetics at play around gossip. And there were moments of having being in situations and really feeling one, I had just made the decision that I didn't want to contribute my energy to gossiping anymore.
Hmm.
And thought that in my head, I just was like, oh, I won't engage. And then in certain situations, I start to get kind of baited into
Hmm.
and it's very noticeable of like who's not contributing. And the subjectiveness around that is what's gossip to me may not be gossip to others. And definitely seeing the different reactions when I did have to communicate my intent to not go down that line. And that's what kind of comes up with this free flowing is as well when we're thinking about relationships and certainly with children because they are independent souls as well and they need to figure out their boundaries and what feels safe and connected for them is that there is flow to boundaries and especially if they're pertaining to relationships whether it's parent and child friendships family dynamics there's a two-way street there and realizing that sometimes you need to ebb and flow and have conversations around what those boundaries look like for both individuals.
Yeah. And sometimes they're just really simple, like you said earlier, simplicity. Like again, like also I'm reminded of, baby steps. Sometimes you practice boundaries in small ways because you're learning what they look like, what it feels like, what it means to hold yourself accountable to your word or your intention. And I was thinking about one of the big things happening in my life is, I know that we are in the process of acquiring a new business and a new property. And I know that when that happens, my daily life is going to change. It's not going to change drastically. I'm not doing a 9 to 5. I'm not doing any of that, but my life will change. I have a lot of freedom about my days right now. I make my own schedule. I move at my own pace. I wake up and I do, I have some sense of a loose routine. And so I know that I need to set some ground rules for myself. At least I knew and have started to in the last few months because I knew that this shift was happening in my outer world. And so it's been, you know, baby stepping my way to a point where, again, like to throw in some astrology, I have a Taurus moon. I don't like sudden changes. I don't like disruptions. I understand they're part of life, like just human life, doing things, right? Like, but there are moments where I'm like in a flow. I'm in my mode and something comes along and, someone knocks on my door, which I'm like, who's knocking on my door? Like, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you let me know? Give me a heads up. I don't like surprises. It's just
Just FYI, Michelle is not a swing on by and knock on my door type of home.
don't knock on my door. I mean, it depends, right? But like even, today we were on the phone and my friend texted me and she's like, I left you some flowers and some vegetables from my garden outside. And like, of course, like it's not always going to be this pleasant surprise, but I just don't love the disruptions.
Yeah.
It's not, that doesn't mean that I live my life avoiding the disruptions and getting, thrown off by them. It's just something I'm aware of that is not my comfort zone. And thinking about this bigger shift that's happening in my external life, I literally had to plan for it. And it's very timely of the Virgo of it all, of the new
Mhm.
moon, of all of these themes, these collective themes that we're all experiencing in different ways. I literally, like, I'll give you some like simple examples, right? Like I started doing this thing recently, not too recent, but in the last coming recent months where I've started to plan out, okay, what is the menu for the week? I actually got inspired because I saw someone do a beautiful, of course, Taurus moon. I have
Mhm.
to be inspired aesthetically. It needs to look beautiful. And then it usually trickles into an action. And so I saw this woman or some person online do like this week's menu and did this beautiful menu of what they were cooking at home for the week. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And every time I set up structure and a boundary around, I am going to plan out what I'm cooking in the week. And it may change, but I'm setting myself up for success because now I'm not worried and I'm not frustrated about it. So that's one example. And then I started doing, one of my intentions in recent months was how am I going to show up differently in my relationship? And how am I going to, through my actions, show up with more love and more nurturing? And so I started to recently wake up in the mornings and instead of tending to myself and my own things, I've been like, hey, to my husband, what do you want for breakfast? Do you want me to make you some eggs? Do you want me to do this? And I'm getting up earlier, right? So I'm like creating these little structures. And I think on the topic of boundaries, one, and maybe this is where I think I went a little far in my sense of self was like I really devote time to myself in the mornings. And I don't live alone. I have a partner. Like he works hard and he does things. And so just that small shift and the way that it's rippled into other elements is one, I'm awake and out of bed earlier. I start my days earlier. I have more time in my mornings where I'm like, it's only 9. Like I've gotten so much done. I'm doing so much, right? And it's like all of those little steps and maybe self boundaries or whatever it is or structure that I'm putting and implementing in small ways are helping me set myself up so that when I am out of the house in the future for 3 days a week or whatever that looks like, different from now. I've built this nice framework for myself so that I can have more flexibility and more enjoyment of those moments. And I'm not like, oh God, I didn't get to this thing. I didn't do this,
Yeah.
and it's subtle. It seems
Yeah.
simple, but it also is so impactful. And that's so very Virgo, of
Yeah.
course,
I think you say it sounds simple, and for anybody who is listening, I think they probably would say, no, that doesn't seem simple to create new patterns
totally.
and things going on. It is very intentional, and we bring this up a lot in the freelance world. I'm a trainer and I teach people, and so we give feedback and coaching, and then they get time to have role plays and real plays and implement some of those changes. And what came up for me on that is sometimes we can overcorrect. So maybe not specific to your world, but if we were wanting to set those boundaries in the morning of, no, I'm going to spend time on myself and my self-care.
Yeah.
And it sounds like maybe we overcorrected, and not in a bad way, in a way of now you're being mindful of how maybe your boundaries setting up for yourself did not allow that connection with your husband as much, and now you're able to adjust and tweak and look at those. And I think a lot of times when we set boundaries or intentions as energy works, and this reminds me back to be magnetic, and just be prepared that you are going to get opportunities and situations in which you're going to get to continue to practice those
Hmm.
boundaries.
Hmm.
And in a lot of ways, you and I, while our worlds look different, have been in that same energetic path. And this last month and a half, even though I've been really busy and had a lot going on, I have been very conscious of you are being set up to not abandon all of this beautiful work you've done around setting boundaries and prioritizing your mental, spiritual, and physical needs. And so when all of this stuff was going on and I'm traveling and these days are very long, I knew because I had set these boundaries with myself about 8 hours of sleep a night. And when I had the choice of staying up later and preparing and rehearsing for the next day, I leaned back on that boundary of no, 8 hours is really important for you in a lot of ways, health, mentally. Get that 8 hours of sleep and you're going to do the best that you can. And as a result, I was then able to, I mean, I'm killing my classes. I'm getting great net promoter scores. And what that's telling my brain is I'm like feeling rewarded for taking care of myself. And
Mm.
that's a lot that was coming up just in your example, but that's what
Yeah.
it took me on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of this kind of subtle and, yeah, in a lot of ways, these things are, I don't want to say easy, but they are easier for me in this context. One, because I've worked at it in
Yeah.
every way. I mean, right? That's why I like coaching. That's why I like to coach people, and also why it's important when you coach other people to be about what you speak about. Like if you are coaching people on certain things, like it doesn't mean you have to be perfect and you're not all, you know, um, like you're not a human, you're like this perfect person. It's not the case. It's just that you do the work. You do it for yourself and and two, there is also this element of the two line in human design. I don't know why I know, but I know. And I think that applies like to other aspects of my life because so often I'm like, yeah, I just did the thing. I did it, right? Like, and that doesn't mean like I woke up and did this like tremendous thing. It's just that I've gotten really, really good at and also have no recognize there's a natural element of that and maybe just the acceptance that like I've given myself enough time and data to know that the really good meaningful things sometimes take like happen over like microdosing little steps,
Mhm.
like the baby steps because it's such a reflex now to know like when I want to make a big change or when I'm going to make any type of shift, I'm like, okay, well, what can I do right now? I'm not worried about the end result. I'm worried about what can I actually do with what I have and where I'm at in this moment. And that takes practice, literally. Like I'm still in practice.
We'll always be called to bigger things. In hindsight is always 2020. And in hindsight, that example of which was very low risk, if you think about the scheme of my life, of having to have that conversation with a friend about him bringing someone I wasn't comfortable into, my chosen family circle of friends.
Hmm.
That was an example of universe source, whatever it may be, giving me these really low risk, safe
Hmm.
ways in which I needed to communicate and set boundaries, which helped set me up for some of these. And I would just say larger because it feels like they're more high stakes and conversations that I've had to have the last couple of years where there is the outcome, did and had potential to lead to some pretty painful separations, painful, feelings around that. And what I would also say is that having those conversations around boundaries, in addition, created much stronger and beautiful and healthier relationships with others as well. So I've been able to see the yin and yang of it all. And you can also argue that with when we go back to the only people that will have a problem with you setting a boundary or have a negative reaction is those who benefited from it. And I
Mhm.
definitely had people in my life who reacted in ways that I wasn't prepared for. And the hindsight in 2020 is that it is bringing more health and peace to my life because I'm not betraying my needs and my
Mhm.
what I'm worthy of. That again, being more mindful of not wanting to disappoint myself before disappointing others. So that's kind
Mhm.
of full circle for me on boundaries and where I'm at now these days.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You said confidence earlier when I was sharing about my morning kind of ritual that I do when I wake up. And I always think about two things when it comes to confidence. One is you cannot experience real confidence without experiencing that insecurity or that discomfort, right? Like they really do go
Yeah.
hand in hand. And the second part of that is that, confidence is built on actions. And so doing the low risk or starting somewhere with what you can, with what you have, practicing, just doing it, doing the thing, whatever it is, whether you can explain it, whether you don't feel the need to explain it, it doesn't matter. It's just doing the thing. Like it compounds, those smaller acts of it compounds into this larger sense of confidence in yourself or confidence in your ability to have the difficult conversation, to sit with the difficult emotions and not try to, you know, run from them or avoid them. And I think that's really an important. I looked at my notes and I had hyper independence written down, but I think that's really, really important because I said earlier, like boundaries are not about putting up walls. They are literally containers for you to be able to free flow, to be able to preserve or build your energy, be it emotional, mental, all of the ways that we experience energetics. And they're not about controlling. Boundaries don't help you control shit,
Yeah.
okay? Like, I'm sorry, it's building your own,
Yeah.
whether we use words like resilience and confidence and self-trust and anchor, all of those are true because you cannot control someone else's reaction. You cannot control the external factors. All you can control is how you show up. And so I think that's really important to acknowledge because so often in the conversation of setting or speaking your boundaries, we are hoping and expecting for an outcome. And the truth is, it's not even about the outcome, in my opinion. It's about the act of just doing it, of allowing yourself to say the thing or feel or act in accordance with whatever that boundary is for you. But so I think that's really important. Like, we're not controlling anyone else's actions, we're not
Yeah.
controlling what's going on around us. We are controlling our own sense of stability or security or mental health, emotional well being, physical health, whatever that lands in.
The example that comes up, trigger warning for those who maybe have people who they love with substance issues, but a boundary could very well be no drinking in my house,
Hmm.
no substances in my house for said person. And that doesn't mean you're controlling to get them sober, right? That's their
Yeah.
journey. So that's kind of the specific situation I was thinking of. And yes, extreme, but I think to highlight that you're allowed to ask for things and you do not have control over how those people respond or the choices that they want to make. So trust me, if you need a script to say, like, read this, and you will always have positive outcomes. It does not exist. Trust me, I have looked for it. There are tools and ways in which you can communicate boundaries, and there is that piece that you have no control over, much
Hmm.
to the chagrin of people who like to have control.
Yeah, tell me about it. All right. Anything else to add on the conversation of boundaries? There's probably a lot, but I think we've talked about a ton.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to round out. And if anything, hoping that our listeners will just take away what boundaries might look like in their life, what they are not. Certainly, a takeaway would be just start taking note of where your energy is leaking, where you're giving more than you're giving back. And that could be in relationship. It could be just within yourself as well.
I did have some questions that came up in terms of energetic boundaries, right? Maybe with other people or with yourself. Where am I saying yes out of fear, habit, or old conditioning? I think that's a really interesting question to pose. What can I release or maybe even lovingly say no to? I had a question that said, where can I allow support instead of carrying it all alone? Maybe that was more reflective of the eclipse season, but
That feels very the eclipse season. But I think
yeah.
those first two questions would be really strong questions just for our audience to think on.
Hmm.
And if things are coming up for you that feel unaligned, that might be an opportunity where a boundary might need to be set. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Or even simpler one. What is one boundary I can set this week that will support my well-being? Keep it simple.
yeah. Well, thanks for joining us on this conversation around boundaries. And here's hoping that this information will serve you well and get the wheels turning so that you can lean more into self-care, self-love, and self-growth.
Terrific.
Thanks for tuning in. If you resonate with today's conversation, connect with us on Instagram at Karmic Mirror Podcast and send us a message.
And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And if you're loving Karmic Mirror, we'd appreciate a glowing review or a share with someone who could benefit.
As we close, remember, life is not a one-size-fits-all approach. How are you honoring your unique path? Stay curious and always be kind to yourself. Until next time on Karmic Mirror.